It's been announced that primary school children as young as 5 will receive lessons in sex education, and that's going to include same-sex relationships, transgender families and staying safe online.
Yeah. The new guidelines, it will only be about relationships at primary level. So nothing about sex for primary kids.
But that includes same-sex relationships.
But it's all about love and families and relationships, not about sex. So it's about trying to reduce the level of bullying faced by LGBT kids in schools so that they feel confident and affirmed. We know that where schools do address sex and relationships, that the level of understanding goes up, the level of bullying goes down, that makes for a more harmonious school. Just the aim of these lessons is pure. It's to look after the sexual, emotional and mental health of young people. We want to cut the level of teenage pregnancies and abortions, reduce the levels of sexual infections, stop abusive relationships. That's what these lessons are all about.
Isn't that lovely? Isn't that just the loveliest thing you've ever heard? I hate to break this to you, but there are actually people who believe Peter Tatchell is a paedophile. And when I go through with you just how flimsy their reasons are, you are going to laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. First up, his contribution to a paedophile anthology called Boy, Betrayal of Youth, that came out in 1986 and was put together by ex-vice chairman of the Paedophile Information Exchange, Warren Middleton, aka John Parrott. Let's let Peter explain how that came about in his own words to blogger Matthew Hopkins in 2014. I believed it to be a serious book on various aspects of children's welfare and rights. I had no suspicions and no reason for any suspicions. I am a trusting person. I always believe the best of people. In the case of the many books I have contributed to over the last 30 years, I have never researched the publishers, editors or co-authors. I don't have an evil, suspicious nature. Contrary to what you say, I was never asked to write a chapter about abolishing the age of consent. That was never mentioned when I was given my brief, and I did not argue for its abolition. I believe him, and I'm sure you do too, because like me, you do not have an evil, suspicious nature. Now let's take a look at Peter's accidental contribution to this anthology, just to put to bed any lingering doubts any of you might have about why he contributed to it. It's just a short piece, as you can see, which is in the links below, and I'm going to read its main part that makes its meaning very clear. Certainly, in the realm of sexual ages of consent, we need to ask whether the law has any legitimate role to play in criminalising consenting, victimless sexual activity. As for protecting the young, the main protection they need, as do adults, is legal protection against forced, involuntary sexual acts, which is afforded by the laws covering rape and sexual assault. Now, you might say that what that means is he wants to abolish the age of consent, but he says it doesn't, and he should know what he means, right? Before we go on to the next ridiculously flimsy reason for claiming Peter is a paedophile, let's contrast what he has said about who asked him to contribute to this anthology. The critics also cite Warren Middleton's book Betrayal of Youth, to which I contributed a chapter. I had no idea he was involved in paedophilia advocacy when I was asked to write my essay. That, as you can see, was his 2012 statement. This is from an interview from July last month from the Irish publication Gript. Were you aware of who the editor of the book would be before you wrote your piece? I was not aware of the editor of the book. So his story's changed, but let's not be evil and suspicious. I'm sure the last reason he was asked to contribute to a book on abolishing the age of consent was because he wanted to abolish the age of consent. On the 26th of June 1997, The Guardian published this letter from Peter Tatchell. Ross Coward, who I dares to speak, says nothing useful. June 23rd. Thinks it is shocking that Gay Men's Press has published a book, Dares to Speak, which challenges the assumption that all sex involving children and adults is abusive. I think it is courageous. The distinguished psychologists and anthropologists cited in this book deserve to be heard, offering a rational, informed perspective on sexual relations between younger and older people. They document examples of societies where consenting intergenerational sex is considered normal, beneficial, and enjoyable by old and young alike. Professor Gilbert Hurt points to the Sambia tribe of Papua New Guinea, where all young boys have sex with older warriors as part of their initiation into manhood. Far from being harmed, Professor Gert says the boys grow up to be happy, well-adjusted husbands and fathers. The positive nature of some adult-child-adult sexual relationships is not confined to non-Western cultures. Several of my friends, gay and straight, male and female, had sex with adults from the ages of 9 to 13. None feel they were abused. All say it was their conscious choice and gave them great joy. While it may be impossible to condone paedophilia, it is time society acknowledged the truth that not all sex involving children is unwanted, abusive, and harmful. Peter Tatchell, 2015, on that letter.
So what I've said about the age of consent has been grossly misrepresented. The letter to The Guardian was edited. It was primarily a defence against censorship. People were saying that a book that had been written about these issues should not be discussed. There should be no public debate about the issues. It was a book by academics, by scientists from around the world. I believe in academic freedom, and that was what the letter was defending. It did say at the end that I felt that it was impossible to condone paedophilia, so I made it quite clear that I was not condoning sex with children in any way. I've made that very clear since as well.
That's a funny way of not condoning sex with children in any way. Peter came under quite a bit of flack in The Guardian's letters page, as you might imagine, and on 1st July they printed this rebuttal from him. As you can see, there is not a word about The Guardian having edited this letter or it having been about censorship. But he did assure us that the anthology was by people with academic titles, so I'm sure that puts it beyond all reproach. In 1998, Peter wrote a glowing obituary to LGBT campaigner Ian Dunn. What he failed to mention is that Mr. Dunn was co-founder of the Paedophile Information Exchange, or that at his funeral a 15-year-old boy said he had raped him and he'd come to make sure he was dead. But you can't know everything, can you? In 1997, Peter published an interview he did with a 14-year-old ex-male prostitute called Lee. When Lee was 8 years old, he and another 8-year-old boy performed oral sex on each other after seeing it done in a homosexual porn video. Instead of lamenting a minor being corrupted at such a young age by homosexual porn, Peter celebrated Lee's gayness and called for the age of consent to be lowered even further. Stop being evil and suspicious. In 1996, Peter's homosexual lobby group Outrage has succeeded in getting the age of homosexual consent lowered to 16 to bring it in line with the heterosexual age of consent. This is Peter Tatchell holding up a sign with his fellow human rights activists, telling the world 16 is just a start. Fortunately, Peter was able to put the record straight with those Irish fellas at Gript. The outrage placard, 16 is just a start, refer to the fact that the battle for an equal age of consent at 16 was just the start of a larger campaign to repeal all anti-gay discrimination. The adjacent placards in the same photos indicated that. They said, "Scrap all anti-gay laws." Thank you for that reassurance, Peter. In 2018, Peter spoke at the Festival of Education at Wellington College, where he said that school children should be taught about anal sex, oral sex, and sadomasochism. He also urged that it should be made as hard as possible for parents to take their children out of relationship education classes. I saw the Times Education Supplement link before they took it down, and David Curtin's graphic account of what the TES reported Peter Tatchell as saying is 100% accurate. Sadomasochism for kids, coming to a school near you.
The aim of these lessons is pure. It's to look after the sexual, emotional, and mental health of young people. We want to cut the level of teenage pregnancies and abortions, reduce the levels of sexual infections, stop abusive relationships. That's what these lessons are all about.
Relationship education is a paedophile scam that's come about by blaggers like Peter Tatchell and Andrew Moffat, manipulating and intimidating us into compliance with words like homophobe and the latest one, transphobe. And rather than use our critical faculties and risk unpleasantness, we have chosen to be cowards and put our children at risk. The LGBT movement has had a paedophile agenda from its inception. The largest LGBT organisation is Stonewall. Its leading co-founder was a gentleman called Peter Ansham. I'm going to read you a letter that Mr. Ansham had published in The Guardian on the 15th September 1975, in which he got somewhat antsy about allies not going along with the whole enchilada of the agenda he and his colleagues were pursuing. Sir, here is a note from a non-sponsor, non-paedophile homosexual member of CHE concerning Peter Haynes' emotive nonsense which John Torrode endorses. What evidence do you have as to the effect on children of sexual relations with adults? Where are your examples? What is your proof? What precisely is Haynes or Torrode's knowledge of the matter? How much of their attitude is based on the proven experience of those qualified to assess it about paedophilia at home and abroad? How much of it is based on prejudice, ignorance and bigotry? Before Torrode suffocates his inferior reader with his ubermensch morality, would he kindly give us the facts? Yours truly, Peter Ashman. When this paedophile scam relationship education plays out, there will be endemic child sex abuse in our schools. And when it comes to light, instead of prosecutions, the age of consent will be abolished. What the child sex abusers will say is, "But we have educated your children to give consent to all kinds of sex, and they have given the informed consent that you asked us to teach them." And a country so morally bankrupt to be where we are today will swallow the whole enchilada and make our children open season for paedophiles. That is Britain's paedophile future, but you can stop it. Write to the Education Secretary, the Right Honourable Gavin Williamson, CBE MP, right now and tell him he needs to use his power to put a stay on relationship education till a thorough safeguarding review is conducted. I am perfectly satisfied that if the facts are looked at dispassionately and objectively, Parliament will realise it was had and repeal that abomination of legislation that swung the school gates wide open to predators. Get writing, share this video so that others write to the Education Secretary as well, and in the words of Todd Beamer, a Christian who led 2 homosexual rugby players and other passengers to stop Flight 93 from reaching its target, let's roll.